I retired at 64 and bought a timber-frame cottage on Lake of Bays in Muskoka so I could finally hear myself breathe. No streetcars rattling past the bedroom window. No neighbors' renovations drilling through the walls at 7 in the morning. Just loons echoing across the water and the wind moving through the white pines. Then my daughter-in-law phoned me and said, "Your son and I have decided my parents are moving into your cottage for the summer. If that's a problem for you, list it and move back to Toronto, where you can actually be useful." I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, but I made certain that by the time they drove up that gravel road, they'd find precisely the welcome they deserved. Before I go on, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what time it is wherever you're watching from. The papers at the lawyer's office in Huntsville were spread across a polished oak desk, and I signed each one the way I'd signed ironwork drawings for 41 years at the steel foundry in Hamilton. My hand was steady. The lawyer, a woman named Catherine Doyle with kind eyes and a firm handshake, slid the final document across to me and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Whitlock. You're now the owner of one of the prettiest places on the lake. $465,000. Every cent I'd saved through 4 decades of overtime, canceled holidays, and tuna sandwiches eaten at my workbench, while the younger lads went down to Tim Hortons. All of it now, a 3-bedroom cottage with a boathouse, a cedar dock, and just shy of 2 hectares of mixed forest running right down to the shoreline. The drive from Huntsville took me along winding roads that narrowed as the forest closed in. Highway turned to Township Road, and Township Road turned to gravel. My mobile signal dropped from 4 bars to 1, and I felt something in my chest loosen that had been clenched for longer than I could remember. I stopped at a general store in Dwight for milk, eggs, back bacon, and a jar of maple syrup from a farm up near Algonquin. The woman behind the counter asked if I was up for the long weekend. "Living here now," I said. She smiled the way people up there smile at folks who've made the right decision. "You'll love it. Quiet as Sunday morning." The last kilometer was a tunnel of birch and balsam fir, the late May sun breaking through in bright copper coins on the road. When the lake first appeared through the trees, I pulled the truck onto the shoulder and just sat there. A great blue heron was standing at the edge of the reeds, perfectly still. As I watched, it struck and came up with a perch flashing silver in its beak. No sirens, no horns on Yonge Street, no upstairs neighbor dragging furniture at 11 at night, just the wind in the pines and water lapping the rocks. The cottage was better than the listing photos. Weathered cedar logs, silvered by 40 winters, a riverstone fireplace climbing the north wall, big windows facing west over the water. 3 bedrooms, which seemed extravagant for a man on his own. But after decades in a rented walk-up on Dundas Street, the extra space felt like a gift. I unpacked the way I'd run every job at the foundry. Tools lined up on the pegboard in the boathouse, each one in its place. Books on the built-in shelves sorted by subject. Metallurgy, Canadian history, the Farley Mowat books I'd been promising myself I'd finally read. Coffee maker set where the morning light would reach it first. By sunset, everything was sorted. I poured a coffee too late in the day, not caring one bit, and carried it out to the Muskoka chair on the dock. The heron was gone, but a pair of loons had glided into the bay, their calls carrying across the water like something ancient and familiar. I rang my son Elliot. "Dad," he said, and the warmth in his voice came through even on that weak signal. "Did it close? Are you in?" "Sitting on my own dock," I told him, watching the loons. "You earned this." 41 years, Dad. You earned every board foot, something I'd been holding on to for a long time, eased in my chest. Elliot had grown up watching me leave before sunrise and come home after dinner. He understood what this place meant. "How are things in Toronto?" I asked. "Busy. Good, mostly." There was a pause. Sienna's parents have been staying with us the last couple of months. Their condo's got some kind of water damage from the building above. It's been tight. "How much longer?" "Another few weeks, they say. But you know how these things go." We talked about his marketing job at a firm in Liberty Village, about my plans to rebuild the dock cribs before the July-long weekend. Safe ground. When we hung up, I watched the last light go out of the sky and felt something I hadn't felt properly in years. Peace. The call came the following evening. I was back out on the dock with my coffee, watching the sunset turn the water the color of wild strawberries. The display said Sienna. I'd known that name and that particular clip tone for the 7 years she'd been married to my boy. "Hello, Sienna. Frank. I need to talk to you about something." "Go on, then. My parents can't stay in our condo any longer." It's too small, and the restoration's dragging on. Elliot and I have talked it over, and the best thing is for them to stay at your cottage for the summer. Maybe into the autumn. I set the coffee mug down on the arm of the chair very, very carefully. Sienna, I only took possession of this place yesterday. I haven't even. It's perfect. You've got 3 bedrooms. They need somewhere quiet. And honestly, Frank, you're one man rattling around all that cottage. It only makes sense. There it was. That phrase that always seemed to mean me giving up something I'd earned so that someone else could have it for free. Family helping family, she said next. Right on cue. Has my son agreed to this? Elliot understands that sometimes we have to make sacrifices. Unlike some people, I looked out across the bay at the loons drifting into the deep water. 36 hours. That's how long I'd had my peace. When are they planning on arriving? Friday. Flying into Toronto Pearson. Then they'll take the bus up to Huntsville. You can pick them up at the terminal. She paused and her voice hardened. And Frank, don't make this difficult. My parents are good people. If you've got a problem with it, sell the cottage and come back to the city where you can be of some use. The line went dead. I sat there while the darkness settled over the lake and the loons called back and forth across the water. My hands wanted to shake. I didn't let them. 41 years I'd been the one who said yes when he meant no. The one who swallowed every complaint to keep the peace at the table. The one whose quiet made room for everyone else's noise. Not this time. I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and the mechanical pencil I'd used on structural drawings for 2 decades. This time, I wasn't designing a bridge truss. I was designing something else entirely. Morning found me still at that table. I'd slept maybe 3 hours. The coffee pot was empty. I made another. The first call I made was to the Township of Lake of Bays municipal office. I've just closed on a property off Limberlost Road, I told the clerk. I'd like to understand the bylaws around short-term rentals and long-term guest occupancy. She walked me through the rules with the patience of someone who'd fielded the question 1,000 times. Short-term rental licenses. Registered occupancy. Fire code requirements for anyone staying past 30 days. I took careful notes. Next, I phoned my insurance broker in Hamilton, Doug, who'd handled my policies for 30 years. I need to understand exactly who's covered under my cottage policy. Specifically, if long-term occupants move in without being declared. Doug was thorough. My policy covered me as a sole owner-occupier. Any additional long-term residents had to be declared in writing, and the premium would need adjusting. Undeclared guests could void my liability coverage altogether if something happened. Planning on renting it out? Doug asked. Just being cautious. Frank, in 3 decades, you've never filed a claim. You're the most careful man I've got on the books. On the Tuesday, I drove down to Bracebridge, to a hardware shop on the main street. The owner, a man named Murray with hands like leather, helped me find what I needed. Wildlife cameras, I told him. Watching the deer come through the property. Smart. A lot of folks up here use them for security. Motion activated, night vision, send a photo right to your phone. I bought 3 cameras, plus a motion-triggered floodlight for the driveway. Paid cash, kept the receipt. On the Wednesday, I installed them myself. One tucked into a white pine covering the driveway. One under the eave of the boathouse facing the dock. One above the front door. I tested each one, adjusted the angles, made sure the sightlines overlapped. The engineer in me was pleased. On the Thursday, I drove into Huntsville to the law office of Mackenzie and Routledge. Joanne Routledge was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with the direct manner of someone who'd grown up in a small town and wasn't inclined to waste words. I laid out the situation for her the way I'd present a project summary. No emotion, just facts. So your daughter-in-law has informed you that her parents are arriving tomorrow to move into your home. You never agreed to any of it. She's told you to either accept it or sell the cottage. That's the shape of it. Mr. Whitlock, you are under no legal obligation whatsoever to house your son's in-laws. This is your property. You have every right to refuse them entry. What if they turn up anyway? If they refuse to leave after you've clearly asked them to, that's trespassing under the Trespass to Property Act. OPP will attend. You can have them removed. I nodded. I don't want to damage my relationship with my son. He's being pulled in several directions. Then document everything. Every phone call, every text. Put requests in writing when you can. If they show up and won't leave, give them a written notice first, polite but firm. If they ignore it, we escalate. I hired her on the spot. $3,000 retainer, paid by check. On the drive back along Highway 60, I thought about Elliot. My boy, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder at Leafs games, who I'd taught to change the oil in a Ford pickup, who I'd watched walk across the stage at his McMaster convocation with my eyes stinging. He wasn't the problem. Sienna was the problem. And perhaps I was too, for letting her push the boundaries for 7 years without ever once saying enough. That evening I sat on the dock with a Lake of Bays lager instead of coffee. The loons were calling again, and I thought about what was coming. Sienna wasn't the kind to let something go. She'd escalate. She always did. I had to be ready. Friday came cool and gray, with that early summer fog that sits on the water until the sun burns it off. I was up at 5, coffee on, watching the mist lift. My phone had a text from Sienna. Parents arriving Huntsville Bus Terminal 11. 4:05, be there. I didn't reply. At 11:45, I was on the dock reading a history of the Muskoka Mills. At noon, my phone buzzed. Sienna, voicemail. At 12:20, a text. Where are you? They're standing at the terminal. I kept reading. At 1 o'clock, Elliot rang. I picked up. Dad, what's going on? Sienna's parents are stranded at the bus terminal. She said you were supposed to fetch them. Elliot, I never agreed to fetch anyone. I never agreed to any of this. A long silence. But Sienna said Sienna told me. She didn't ask. There's a difference, son. Dad, they're family. No, they're her family. I've met them perhaps a dozen times in 7 years. I didn't buy my retirement cottage so strangers could set up shop in my guest rooms. More silence. I could hear Sienna's voice in the background, tight and demanding. Dad, please. Just for a few weeks, while I'm sorry, son. The answer is no. I know that puts you in a hard spot, but I'm not going to be held responsible for promises your wife made without my consent. I heard him let out a long breath, the kind that comes from a man who's been holding it too long. I'll talk to her. Send them my regards. There's a perfectly good Best Western in Huntsville. They can work it out from there. I ended the call and went back to my book, but my mind wouldn't settle. I walked the property instead. Checked the cameras. Watched the water. 2 hours later, the driveway camera pinged my phone. A rental car was coming up the road. I watched on the little screen as it rolled into the clearing and stopped. 2 people got out, a man and a woman in their late 60s, Gordon and Beverly Ashworth, Sienna's parents. I'd exchanged maybe a dozen conversations with them in 7 years, most of them at holiday dinners where Gordon did most of the talking and Beverly did most of the sighing. Gordon was already surveying the cottage the way a man appraises property at auction. Beverly was waving a hand at a black fly. I met them on the porch. Gordon, Beverly, this is a surprise. Frank, Gordon said, offering a brief businesslike handshake. Sienna said you'd be here. There's been no miscommunication. I never agreed to collect you, and I never agreed to let you stay. Beverly's face went tight. I'm sorry? Sienna doesn't own this property. I do, and I'm telling you, you're not staying here. Gordon stepped forward, and his voice shifted into a register I recognized. The voice of a man who was used to getting his way. Come on now, Frank. Let's be reasonable. We're family. Sienna and Elliot think this is the best solution. And frankly, you're one man in a 3-bedroom cottage. It's selfish to turn us away. Selfish. I let the words sit in the air between us. I worked 41 years for this place. I walked a picket line in 1,989 inches minus 25-degree weather to keep my pension. I missed my boy's hockey tournaments and his school plays. I earned this cottage. And you're calling me selfish for not handing it over to people I barely know. We're not asking for handouts, Beverly snapped. We're family. You're strangers who happen to be related to my daughter-in-law. That's not the same thing. Gordon's face darkened. Sienna warned us you'd be difficult. I didn't believe her. And yet, I crossed my arms. Deerhurst Resort is 40 minutes back toward Huntsville. There's the Delta, in Bracebridge. Take your pick. Now please, leave my property. We're not going anywhere, Gordon said. We drove 3 hours. You drove an hour and 10 minutes from Huntsville. I've already checked the distance. I held up my phone. You have 5 minutes to get back in that car before I phone the OPP. Beverly grabbed her husband's arm. Gordon, let's go. We'll ring Sienna. She'll sort this out. They retreated to their rental car, still muttering between themselves. I stood on the porch and watched them drive back down the gravel road. Then I went inside and pulled up the camera footage. Every word recorded. Every second time-stamped. The phone started ringing within the hour. Sienna first, furious. Voicemail. Then Elliot, pleading. Voicemail. Then Sienna again, leaving a message that was more warning than conversation. You're going to regret this, Frank. You think you can humiliate my parents and walk away? You're wrong. Elliot and I are talking to a lawyer. I saved the message. That night I sat on the dock with a dram of Crown Royal and watched the stars come out one by one. I knew what was coming. Sienna wouldn't let this stand. She'd find another angle. I had to stay ahead of her. 3 weeks went by. Quiet weeks. I didn't trust the quiet. I spent them the way I'd spent the planning phase of every major project of my career. Research, documentation, contingencies. Through Joanne Routledge, I was put in touch with a private investigator out of Barrie, a woman named Louise Tremblay who'd spent 20 years with the OPP before going private. For $600, she ran a background check on Gordon Ashworth. What she found kept me up for 2 nights. Gordon had declared personal bankruptcy 3 years earlier. A failed import-export business he'd run into the ground. The Ashworth's condo in Mississauga hadn't suffered water damage. They'd missed mortgage payments for 8 months straight, and the unit had been repossessed by the bank in February. They'd been living with Elliot and Sienna for nearly 5 months. Not the couple of months Sienna had told me. But there was worse. Louise had also pulled what she could find on Elliot and Sienna's joint accounts, because Sienna had listed some of those accounts in connection with Gordon's post-bankruptcy filing. There have been substantial e-transfers from your son's joint account to accounts held in Gordon Ashworth's name, Louise told me on the phone. How substantial? I count $52,000 over the past 10 months. $52,000. The down payment money Elliot had been saving for a house in the East End. Retirement contributions. The foundation of my son's future, bleeding out into his father-in-law's pocket. A week later, Elliot called. He sounded exhausted in a way I'd never heard before. Dad, I need to come up this weekend. Just me. Is that all right? Come ahead, son. The spare room's made up. He arrived that Saturday afternoon in the little Subaru they'd bought together the year before. When he got out of the car, I saw how much weight he'd lost. The circles under his eyes were dark enough to look like bruises. We sat on the dock with a couple of beers while the afternoon light moved across the water. Sienna wants me to convince you to let her parents stay here, he said finally. She thinks I can bring you round. That's why she let me come on my own. What do you want, Elliot? He was quiet for a long time. I want my wife to stop crying every night. I want her parents to find somewhere else to live. I want to stop feeling like I'm being pulled apart at the seams. That sounds hard. It is. He took a long pull from his beer. Dad, why did you really say no? 3 bedrooms, 1 man. I know it's your place, but it seemed like something you could help with. I measured my words carefully. Elliot, how much money have you given Gordon and Beverly in the past year? He went very still. Because I know it's at least $52,000. That's what the investigator found in your bank records. You had an investigator look at my finances? I had one look at the Ashworths. Your accounts were attached to Gordon's bankruptcy filings. It came up in the paperwork. He stood up and walked to the end of the dock with his back to me. His shoulders were shaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I didn't want to, at first, but Gordon kept asking, and Sienna would cry, and I kept saying yes. When does it stop, son? I don't know. Here's what I think. I stood and joined him at the edge. I think Gordon lost that condo because he's a poor businessman who doesn't pay his bills. I think they've been living with you for half a year, not 6 weeks. I think they keep asking because they've learned that asking works. And I think Sienna's been protecting them at your expense. I handed him the printed report from Louise. He read it standing there while the sun dropped behind the far shore. When he looked up, There were tears on his face. She lied to me, Dad. She told me it was temporary. She said the condo was being repaired. I know. That money was meant for the house, Dad. We were supposed to put an offer in by the end of the year. His voice cracked. How could she do this? I put my hand on his shoulder. I don't know, son. But now you know. What you do with it is yours to decide. He stayed through the Sunday. We didn't talk about Sienna or her parents. We took the tinny out and caught 3 nice smallmouth off the point. We fried them with potatoes on the deck. Simple things. Father and son things. When he left that evening, he hugged me harder than he had since he was 9 years old. Thank you, Dad, for telling me the truth. I love you, son, no matter what comes next. I watched his taillights disappear down the drive. Then I went inside and waited for the next move, because I knew it was coming. Sienna's retaliation came 10 days later. The first sign was a letter with an Ontario Ministry of Health letterhead. Someone had filed a report with the seniors' safety line alleging that I was living in unsafe isolation, showing signs of cognitive impairment, and might be a danger to myself. The letter requested permission for a welfare check by a community health nurse. I rang Joanne Routledge straight away. This is a well-known pressure tactic, she said, with a kind of calm that made me grateful I'd hired her. Family members sometimes use elder welfare services to leverage older relatives into giving up property or autonomy. It's considered a form of elder abuse in its own right, actually. Let the nurse come. Let them see how you actually live. Be polite, be clear, be yourself. They'll close the file quickly. The nurse came 2 days later. A lovely young woman named Priya, thorough and warm. I showed her around the cottage. Made her a cup of tea with the red rose I keep for company. Answered her questions plainly. Mr. Whitlock, I'm obligated to ask, is there any family conflict that might have prompted this report? My daughter-in-law wanted her parents to live here without my permission. I refused. She threatened consequences. I expect this is one of them. Priya made a small note. I appreciate your candor. The report has some inconsistencies that concern me. Such as? It describes your daily routine in very specific detail, which typically indicates the reporter has visited recently. But the report was filed anonymously from a phone number registered in Toronto, and my colleagues can see you haven't had any overnight visitors in weeks. I almost smiled. Sienna had overplayed the hand. The file was closed the following week, unfounded. But I knew that wasn't the end of it. The next blow came through Elliot himself. He rang me 4 weeks after his visit, and the moment he said hello, I could hear something was off. His voice was flat, reading from something. Dad, I've been thinking, maybe it's time to put the cottage on the market. It's a lot for one man. Sienna's worried about your health up there on your own. Sienna's worried about my health. We both are. It's remote. If you fell or something happened, Elliot. Are you reading from a script? A long, terrible pause. Then, barely above a whisper, she's sitting right here, Dad. I can't. I understand, son. Tell her the message was received loud and clear. And tell her that my health is excellent, my home is exactly where I want to be, and I've no intention of selling. I ended the call and sat at the kitchen table for a long while. Sienna wasn't just after the cottage anymore. She was using my boy as a weapon against me. And Elliot was in too deep to see a way clear. The next morning I rang Louise Tremblay again. I need more, this time on my daughter-in-law. Employment, finances, anything you can find. The report landed in my inbox the following Friday. Sienna had been let go from her agency job in February, 4 months earlier. She hadn't told Elliot. She'd been quietly drawing from their joint savings to mimic her old salary's direct deposits, all while continuing to e-transfer money to her father. The total now exceeded $70,000, on top of a CIBC line of credit she'd opened in Elliot's name 2 years previously without ever telling him it existed. I sat with that for 3 days, telling Elliot would break him, not telling him would let him go on bleeding out. In the end, I did what I always do. The truth. I emailed him the full report. Subject line, "You need to see this." The call came 6 hours later. Elliot's voice sounded hollow, like he was speaking from the far end of a long tunnel. It's all true. I confronted her. She admitted it. The job, the line of credit, the transfers. All of it. She said she was protecting me from stress. I'm sorry, son. She's been lying to me for months, Dad, about everything. And when I asked her why she filed that welfare report on you, she said you deserved it for humiliating her parents. What are you going to do? A long breath. I don't know yet, but I had to ring you. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for not believing you. You trusted your wife. That's what you were supposed to do. I trusted the wrong person. Then learn from it. And whatever you decide, I'm here. I poured a bourbon and walked out to the dock. A hawk was circling high over the bay on the evening thermals. This wasn't what I'd wanted. I'd come up here for quiet, not for battle. But sometimes you fight to protect what matters, and my boy mattered more than any peace ever could. The separation papers were filed 6 weeks later. Elliot phoned to tell me himself. He'd moved out of the condo. Sienna had gone to stay with her parents at a motel in Etobicoke. How are you holding up? Honestly? Better than I expected. It's like somebody finally opened a window I didn't know was closed. He paused. There was more, Dad. Forged signatures on a second line of credit. A credit card in my name I never applied for. It'll take years to sort. I'm sorry, son. Don't be. You're the reason I saw it. If you hadn't stood your ground about the cottage, I might never have known. Come up this weekend. Bring a rod. Elliot drove up that Friday evening, thinner but somehow straighter. The hunted look was gone. We spent Saturday on the lake, catching lake trout off the deep shelf on the east side of the bay, talking about nothing in particular. On Sunday evening, as we grilled the trout over cedar planks, he said something that caught me sideways. Dad, I've been thinking, I'd like to move up this way. Not next door, but somewhere nearby. There's a marketing firm in Bracebridge that's hiring. I've had a first conversation with them. Just like that? I need a fresh start. Somewhere that isn't full of her. He looked out at the water. What do you think? I think you're a grown man who can make his own choices, and I think having my boy close enough to share a dock once a week would suit me just fine. His smile was the first real one I'd seen from him in a year. 2 months later, Elliot signed on with the firm in Bracebridge and found a small apartment in a converted Victorian off Manitoba Street. He came to the cottage most weekends, sometimes to fish, sometimes just to sit on the dock and watch the sun set behind the pines. The separation was finalized just before Christmas, and the divorce a few months after that. Sienna walked away with the condo furniture and her parents' endless demands for more. Elliot walked away with his freedom and what was left of his savings, which wasn't much. The forensic accountant had found another $18,000 in hidden debt. She was going to try to put a claim against the cottage, Elliot told me one evening in early April, over a game of cribbage by the fire. Her lawyer drafted something arguing that money she'd transferred to her parents was actually loans to you, and that gave her a stake in the property. What stopped her? I told her lawyer that if she filed a single piece of paper against you, I'd testify about everything. The forgeries, the hidden accounts, the welfare report, the fraudulent transfers. Her lawyer dropped her as a client that same afternoon. You protected me. You protected me first, Dad, when it would have been easier to stay out of it. He looked at me with clear eyes. That's what family does. The real kind. Spring came slowly to Muskoka that year, the way it always does. The ice went out in the last week of April, and by the middle of May the loons were back on the bay, filling the evenings with those long, mournful calls. I was splitting kindling by the shed one Saturday morning when Elliot's Subaru came up the drive. This time he wasn't alone. A woman got out of the passenger seat, tall, auburn hair, an easy and unguarded smile. Dad, Elliot said as they walked toward me, this is Cora. We worked together in Bracebridge. I've told her a fair bit about you. Cora shook my hand with a grip that told me she worked with her hands as well as her head. He says you're the most stubborn man north of the 401. He means that kindly, I hope. He does. I found myself smiling without meaning to. Do you fish, Cora? Never in my life, but I'll try anything once. We spent the afternoon on the lake, the three of us. Elliot showed her how to cast a spinning rod. She caught the boathouse twice and laughed at herself both times. I liked that about her. That evening, while Cora was down at the dock watching the sunset, Elliot sat beside me on the porch. What do you think, Dad? She's nothing like Sienna. No, she isn't. Then I think you should keep seeing her. He laughed. An honest, full laugh I hadn't heard from my son in a very long time. A year passed. Elliot and Cora got engaged at Thanksgiving. They bought a small brick house in Bracebridge with a yard for the rescue mutt they'd adopted the summer before. I sat in the corner of the lawyer's office when they signed their papers, and I felt the same pride I'd felt watching Elliot walk across that stage at McMaster. The wedding was a small one at a restaurant overlooking Lake Muskoka on a clear October day. 50 guests, mostly Cora's family and Elliot's colleagues. I gave a speech that made Cora cry and her grandmother laugh. Sienna wasn't there, of course. She'd remarried quickly to a man she'd met on a dating app in Oakville. Gordon and Beverly had moved in with them inside 6 months. "He doesn't know what he's signed up for," Elliot said the first time he told me. "Maybe not. Or maybe he does, and thinks he's up to it. Nobody is. They take until there's nothing left. Then I hope he has a good lawyer." That autumn I stood on my dock in the early morning, watching the mist rise off the water. The sugar maples on the far shore were turning, red and orange and gold shimmering in the still bay. A bald eagle flew over, heading toward the deep end of the lake. I thought about the year I'd had, the battle I hadn't wanted, the pain of watching my son's marriage crack and fall apart, the joy of watching him build something real with someone who actually loved him. None of it had gone the way I'd planned. I'd bought this cottage for solitude and quiet. Instead, I'd got a family crisis that nearly cost me my son. But I'd also got something I hadn't seen coming. A closer bond with Elliot than I'd had in 20 years. The certainty that my boy respected me. A front row seat to his new beginning. Maybe peace isn't about being alone. Maybe peace is about being near the right people. Elliot and Cora drove up the weekend after Thanksgiving, the dog bouncing around in the back seat like he owned the place. We took the boat out and fished until the light went. We cooked the catch on the deck, while the loons called to one another across the bay. "Frank," Cora said over dinner, "Elliot and I have been talking about the future, about kids." I looked at my son. He was grinning. "Someday soon, we hope," he said. "And when that happens, I want them to know this place. To learn to fish off your dock. To know their grandfather." I had to look out at the water for a moment, at the last light fading behind the pines. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that a great deal." Cora reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Frank, for raising a man worth loving." After they'd driven off on the Sunday evening, I sat on the dock until full dark, listening to the loons, watching the stars come out. 41 years of work had bought me this cottage. But what I'd built since moving up here was worth more than anything the job had ever given me. A son who trusted me, a future daughter-in-law who respected me, grandchildren, someday, who'd grow up knowing how a loon calls at dusk. Sienna and her parents had tried to take it all from me. Manipulation, lies, welfare reports, legal threats, everything they could think of. And they'd lost. Not because I was clever or wealthier, because I wouldn't trade away the things that mattered to keep a peace that wasn't real. I said no when everyone expected a yes. I chose the hard truth over the easy lie. I protected what was worth protecting, even when it cost me the quiet I'd come looking for. And in the end, I got back more than I'd ever imagined possible. I stood up, worked the stiffness out of my knees, and walked inside to ring my son, just to say goodnight, just because I could. The door closed behind me with that soft cedar sound. Outside, the loons had gone quiet, and the lake had settled into that deep, glassy stillness that only a Muskoka night can give you. Inside, I picked up the phone and dialed. "Hey, Dad," Elliot said on the second ring. "Everything all right?" "Everything's perfect, son. Just wanted to hear your voice." And it was true. For the first time in longer than I could remember, everything truly was. If you've enjoyed this story, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what you would have done in my place. Thanks for listening.